Today is the big day for the Evo 10. Today is turbocharger and downpipe install day. I am very, very excited. Now we have a goal of making 500 wheel horsepower on E85 with this setup. And to do that, we need both of these guys here and all of these mods over here on the table. We're gonna save those for a different day. We should be able to get both of these installed today. The turbocharger we're running is an Art Gennari 57mm turbo with the Art Gennari wastegate. This is their new upgraded billet wheel with the anti-surge compressor housing. Downpipe I decided to go with is an external dump, in other words, a screamer pipe. Extreme Turbo Systems downpipe. ETS parts, as always, are the highest of quality. Fitment is perfect. Nice thick flanges that will never warp. Beautiful welds. Can never go wrong with ETS parts. That paired with the ETS V3 exhaust we installed yesterday, this thing is gonna sound freaking amazing. Now, unfortunately, on Evo 10, the turbo is not very fun to replace. Evo 8, it's easy. Evo 9, easy. Evo 10, it's in the back, which makes it not very fun. I already have the strut tower bar off. The firewall heat shield is removed. So a quick little breakdown. I'll go more in depth later, but a quick breakdown as to what we need to remove to get this turbo off. This heat shield needs to come off. Upper intercooler pipe, intake, air box. And if we really want extra space, which I probably will do, this whole cowl, this whole thing right here can be unbolted. There's about 10mm bolts holding that guy on. That will give us a ton of extra space to get the turbo and the exhaust manifold off this car. Really don't want to scratch it up. This thing's got a brand new paint job on the engine bay and it looks absolutely amazing. So far, here is the table of goodies we've removed. That piece, like I said, you don't have to take that off, but look how much space that opened up for us. And it's only about 5 minutes to remove. Now we're gonna work on getting that heat shield off. I'm hoping we can get all these parts off without breaking any bolts. Let's work on getting the downpipe removed. It is not fun on an Evo, but we gotta do it. We have two different options as far as downpipe removal goes. We can unbolt the O2 housing from the turbo, or we can disconnect the downpipe. There's two 14mm bolts holding the downpipe to the O2 housing. I think I'm gonna attempt that method. So there'll be two bolts right there. We should be able to get to those guys from underneath the car, which hopefully will make it a lot easier. There is this heat shield here, so we gotta pull that guy off. That is held on with two 12mm bolts on the bottom side. There'll be two bolts holding it to the cat, one oxygen sensor, and the downpipe comes off. Here are the other two bolts I was talking about, holding the downpipe to the cat. O2 sensor is this guy here. The downpipe is removed from the car, and now we have an oil feed line, we have an oil return line, we have coolant feed, coolant return, plumbing for the boost control, all of the hardware holding the manifold to the cylinder head, and hopefully from there, the whole guy comes off. I'm removing the exhaust manifold from the turbo just to get that manifold out of the way. It's going to be much easier to remove the turbo without that big old manifold attached to it. We have one bolt left holding the turbo in place. You guys won't be able to see because I can hardly see. There's a bracket up in there, one bolt left, and the turbo will be removed. So we need to unbolt the turbo feed line. We can either unbolt it from the block or unbolt it from the turbo. I'm gonna do from the turbo. So there's the feed bolt right there. There's a little bracket right there, 10 mil bolt. In the oil return line, there was a 12 millimeter bolt right there. That is definitely the most frustrating turbo removal out of any car in the world. I don't care. I don't care what anyone says, man. Pulling the Evo 10 turbo is not fun. There's so many brackets that Mitsubishi has on here. There's like 3 or 4 brackets, all a pain to get to. So there are a few parts that we need to pull off the factory turbo and transfer over to the new turbo. We have all of the coolant pipes and lines, elbow there, inlet there, turbo return line, O2 housing we don't need. Also, the new AGT turbo does come with a braided oil feed line, so go ahead and remove the factory line. All of the parts that needed to be transferred from there to here are installed. Now take note, I did all new studs for the downpipe, and what we're gonna do is not install the studs for the manifold. It's gonna be so much easier to get the manifold onto the turbo with those studs not there. So let's get the turbo on, get it all situated, get the oil feed, oil return, coolant lines hooked up, the bracket, that bolts on right there, get that installed. And then we can do the exhaust manifold and then the downpipe. So the first thing that I get on is the oil return line. It's a hard pipe. If you don't put it on before the turbo is situated, you kind of have to redo it all. So make sure you get that on first. Now make sure that oil feed line goes on first as well. If the manifold is on, of course, you wouldn't have access to get the oil feed line on. Now we are ready for the exhaust manifold. New gasket goes on, manifold goes on. I'll tighten all that down. We can go ahead and slide the gasket in for the manifold to turbo, get those bolts back in, and this thing is nearly complete. So we got the turbo and the exhaust manifold situated up on here. There's two brackets that we're going to be running. Remember that last bolt that we removed holding the turbo to the engine, that little bracket? We're going to be using that one. And on the intake side of the turbo is this bracket right here. We're also going to run this. This bracket that goes back to the block off the factory O2 housing, of course we can't use because we are not using the factory O2 housing. Let's get that lower underneath bracket bolt in, and pretty much all the hard work is done. Getting this guy in is a little bit tricky, but nothing that we can't handle. This side bracket for the intake side actually doesn't fit with the new bigger turbo, but we don't need it. We have that lower one on. That is going to be plenty. So with the turbocharger fully installed, let's slide in this downpipe. Now with the external dump downpipe, you need the gasket that looks like this. A factory style downpipe or a factory style O2 housing uses the gasket that looks like this. You must get one that has the bridge in the center here, otherwise exhaust will leak out the dump tube non-stop, and it's very, very annoying. Now I will say installing one of these guys is not very fun. As you can see, there isn't really much space. Eventually she will slide through. It just takes a while. Our turbo and downpipe install is 100% complete. All of these parts over here we won't be using. I'm not going to be running a factory airbox in the build. I might run that, probably not. And this over here is everything that you should have left over. So this is the factory turbo with the O2 housing on it. Heat shield that wouldn't fit. Another little heat shield bracket thing that wouldn't fit. Intake side bracket wouldn't fit. Factory hard oil feed line that always cracks, replaced out the braided, and the factory downpipe. I did opt to install all the factory heat shielding. Something like this, I would prefer to run all the factory shielding. If it was, of course, a rotated turbo kit, none of that would fit. In that case, I would do a big firewall, like a driven fab firewall heat shield. That's a wrap. Hopefully this video helped you guys out if you're gonna do a turbo replacement on your Evo 10. If you're going for a factory replacement turbo like we did here, I would highly recommend looking into the AGT turbos. They make a 55 mil, 57 mil, a 62 mil, maybe a few others. Very high end factory replacement turbos. This one should be good for about 500 wheel, maybe a little more on ethanol. I will have AGT turbos linked down below. And of course, if you want to pick up that ETS open dump downpipe, I will link that down below as well.